How's it going, everybody? So, we're approaching the end of Opus 20. Probably pretty soon we're going to have a full spoiler list for Opus 21. And at that point, we're going to be kind of looking forward. But I want to take, towards the end of the format, one big look at the past and kind of go over some of the cards from the set that, surprised me, didn't surprise me, so on and so forth. I just got on FFdex. I pulled up Opus 22. And we're going to just kind of go. I'm not going to say card by card, but if something is interesting, I'm going to talk about it. So, Arden actually surprised me. He's better than I thought he was in that there's a really cool build around deck. Check out Steve D's deck profile on it. That is a lot better than you would expect for a card like this. If nothing else, it's a really creative deck and a really cool deck building challenge, and I think it's definitely worth looking at. I don't think it's going to see any serious tournament competitive play, but it's definitely a really cool deck. Um, Ifrit is a massive buff to Megissa decks, especially, but any mono fire deck. Seen a ton of play. Warrior of Light, I think, is a card that probably should see more play than it is. Just not a lot of decks are playing fire that aren't already playing a different Warrior of Light, namely the Opus 19 Legend. But for a common, this is a really nice card to have foils of, because this will become playable in the future. Aran has great art, but just isn't super, like, it's really good and limited where you can't get him off the field. But the problem is that, pinging Aran instead of something like Megissa to draw a card doesn't actually, um, doesn't help you. Like, Megissa is essentially drawing you cards and doing more than Aran already is. So, by that point, it doesn't fit in Megissa decks, and also, the curve is wrong for Megissa decks. But also, the effect is so easily played around that I think it's just, maybe there'll be a format where he comes up in the future, but for now, he's just going to kind of sit in bulk binders, I think. Garland, I actually think, is maybe the best one for Flare specials. If you actually are going for Flare, you can't revive it with Ramza, which is annoying, but it is an EX burst that has decent text. If you ever have to cast it, it's also searchable off of Gabranth. Is it crazy good? No, but it's notable for that. The Demon is format defining. This is one of the best cards that they've ever printed. It does everything. Even just 7 CP, you remove your opponent's breakzone and kill something is really, really good in the right situation. And then, the fact that 6 can give him haste and you can just do these effects twice is wildly good. Easily, this is maybe the best card in the entire set, legend-wise. I will hold on to that statement and not commit to it yet, but it's pretty damn close to being the best card in the set. Kefka is actually better than I thought he was. Fits more naturally into 6 because 6 is playing 3 demons and 1 to 2 fiends. So it's pretty easy to get 2 counters. And 4 CP, 9k ping is actually quite a lot, as it turns out. This just ends up being a really good way to deal with a lot of problem cards. It's not an all-star, it's not amazing, but it is cool. I think Zac is underexplored. I've built 3 different Zac decks that I think all have a lot of potential, and people just aren't playing him right now. But I think stuff like Zac Renoa, I think this is a card to have a playset of because there is a very, very good chance this is a good card in the future, even if it isn't super crazy right now. Keep an eye on this one. Even the special, sure he doesn't do anything on entry, but he cannot leave the field outside of exactly blinking him and then killing him without getting value. And between Renoa and Cloud and everything else, I think this card is criminally slept on, even just as a value piece, right? If you go for category 7 characters of 4 or less, you have Rufus to force a discard. Sephiroth can be played straight out of the deck. Any Sephiroth, the dark one if either player's on damage 4, or the ice lightning. Again, we're talking multiple colors, but I don't think I think Final Fantasy players are a lot less apt to play what I call in Yu-Gi-Oh. What are called in Yu-Gi-Oh. They're called garnets. They're cards that are dead in the deck but live in the hand. Like I think that people like over complain about how like the Stooges are quote unquote bricks, and it's like one of them is a brick, and even the bricks are 2 CP in hand in this deck, and it's not like even drawing it isn't the worst thing in the world. So I think that Zack falls in the same category of like even as like a fire good stuff piece, your opponent doesn't want to remove it because the card that comes in after Zack is often just as strong. But they have to remove it because it still does 5k ping, and the special is a massive threat for the entirety of the time he's there. I think this card will find a deck and will find a format eventually, unless they just print a better Zack at some point, which is possible. It is FFTCG in Final Fantasy VII. They're going to print good card name Zacks in the future. Still hate this backup, but it's. I mean, we need Crystal Gen backups, and these are the only ones they're going to give us for whatever unholy reason. Goldsmith is fine. It's like maybe the best generic fire backup for turning Graha into a 10k. Not saying that much. I guess like the red mage that gives haste isn't like horrible either, but I like my standard unit backups to be breakable, and like 3k and brave is actually a lot. This whole cycle of backups is incredible. Although I will say, I don't think it's that much better than the one drop backups that like cycle for a draw. Because like the really the logic on these is that the floor on 2 CP backups is very low. Or like very high. Like you have to play backups in most decks in the game. And if you play a 2 CP backup that has other utility, it's only going to be so bad. Being multiplayable makes it even better, and the potential to become free means that a lot of times you could just curve out really quickly. That said, it goes from 2 to 0, and the other ones are 1 all the time. And I know that sounds really hypocritical because I love these backups. Weaver is, I think, the reason that Mono Lightning became like viable this set. But I think there's other utility on those cards that makes them as good as they are, almost as much as the cards themselves being that good. I do think that there is still an argument that just tapping a backup but also having the utility of drawing with the backup in the late game is still potentially as good or better than these and just underexplored in comparison. Tifa is better than I thought, mostly because I keep forgetting that Barrett does give infinite specials for any Category 7 character. But like outside of that, I don't love this card. I mean, it's still a 2 CP haster in a deck that every forward has haste anyway. And I don't see her seeing too much play outside of it. There's some cute stuff you can do with like, if you give either Tifa or like there's a Yuffie that has cleave, where like she does 1,000 all the forwards opponent controls, and the Tifa will just say all of your forwards can't be blocked that turn. But you can also just say your opponents can't block that turn by making it not worth it for them to block. So she's good at closing games out as well, which is always nice. This Barrett. Okay, so this goes for this Barrett and the Cloud. These are like Opus 2 cards to me. I don't understand what they're thinking and why this is a rare. And it sucks because like I see a lot of people trying to like find budget ways to play Avalanche without trying to like get a hold of the Opus 14 Barrett, and like they'll try to run this, and it's like, how often are you really taking damage with 3 Category 7 forwards on the field to where it's like actually useful? Like make it 2k for like Category 7 characters, and then like maybe it does something. For forwards, like a lot of times when you take damage, you don't have forwards on the field. And, like if you have 3 forwards on the field, like where this like starts to get like actually pretty relevant, you probably don't need the burst. Like I don't get this design philosophy. It's the same thing with the Cloud does this for DFF forwards. It makes no sense to me. I don't understand these. I mean, I guess like the entry effect is fine, but like 3 CP for 6 or 9k ping is not that good. In a world where like Glaciella or Typhon or all these other 3 CP kill something cards exist, right? So I don't know. I think that these are just not very good. I don't understand what the EX burst is supposed to do on them. Palom is actually not bad. All the 4 crystal cards are actually pretty decent. Phoenix has seen a lot of play this set. Really, really cool card. Montblanc and Hedgehog Pie are massive buffs to Megissa. I'm almost tired of Megissa. I think that she's like kind of warping Fire's entire identity around herself. And like there are outs and ways to deal with her, but she's just not a very interactive, fun deck to play against. I don't think. I think that she's hamstringing Fire's design. I would like to see Fire go a different direction than just how many ways can I ping my Megissa to play a 3-drop from deck. It just feels really limiting. Again, it's not like a major complaint. I'm not saying Megissa's broken or a problem or anything like that. I just don't like playing against the deck at this point. And I don't like that every single card seems to be catering to let's ping the Megissa. Red is actually, I think, a better card than some people might realize. It is just big, but like big for this cheap is not bad at all. Cards like this are actually really good at stabbing off aggro. Armor, get a playset of this in foil. I wouldn't be surprised if like someday Mono Ice is really good, and if it is, this is going to be the best card in Mono Ice. I do really, really want like Ice is the only color without a backup engine, so like it has to run backups like this. But if I could pick like the backup engine I want for Ice, I want Ice to get this a backup that searches a standard unit backup, and I want to see what that would do for them. I don't think it would be even that broken. I just think that it would be like a really interesting option that would push Ice's ability to do that. I saw a lot less of the back attackers in Ice this set than I expected, so I can't even say how really solid they are instead. These are going to see formats that are going to be really annoying because they're going to protect stuff that I don't want to see, like Neo X Death, but I do think that they're just a little awkward to time, and Ice isn't an element that gets enough advantage to really take advantage of these, right? Again, haven't seen a ton of Juggler, but I think this is a card that has a chance to shine in the future. Edward and Cisne are 2 of the best generic Ice backups. I think almost every Ice deck is on a copy of Edward now. Cisne is showing up all over the place. She's another backup engine. And then also, you kind of have to run her with Rufus if you don't want to run other Turks. So she's just good. Setzer is essentially the legend in Ice. This card is wild. But I do think I like cards that are designed around party attacking because they slow the game state down as well. Like they incentivize you to not go for like killing your opponent and like getting advantage from doing that. So like even with like 5 CP lock, a lot of the time it's still correct to party attack and use Setzer, even though it's lowering your damage potential. Which I think is really cool because I think gaining advantage off of that, but giving the opponent time to recover ends up actually being like it becomes kind of fun for both parties in a way. I think Setzer's a very well designed card in that regard. Celez, she's obnoxious for like lethal pushes, but the name clash in 6 is getting very, very tricky to solve. Tera, again, this is the card that like seems interesting, but also like, we have 4 CP Fire Tera that does this on a 5k body, but like requiring a party with a 6 forward specifically to cast a summon a 4 or less just isn't worth it, especially because like 6 as a deck struggles to play summons outside of like maybe an Amaterasu. We're seeing Amaterasu and Unicorn sneak into the deck now just because you kind of have to have interaction beyond just Sabin. But I think the starter Tera is better for 6, and I think if you're playing a Tera that's looking for ice summons, you're probably playing the Legend. She's just so much cleaner. So I don't think there's a lot of room for this anywhere. Number 24, the thing I missed with this guy, by the way, is this is the best anti-aggro card Ice has ever had, which is really cool. A lot of times I would actually use the old Opus 15 Legend Tera as an anti-aggro card because you kind of just lock your opponent out of the game and the ability to attack. But if your opponent's on an aggro deck and you play 24, 24 gets to block as a 9k for free once every single turn, and just uses that to remove the barrier counters, which by using that to remove the barrier counters, he doesn't ever dull himself to not be a blocker. But the opponent can't wait 4 turns for the 24 to actually force himself to be dull. Like, this last line of text just doesn't actually exist, as it turns out, which I think is, like, really interesting. Your opponent has to find a way to, like, do small cleave, but if they're doing aggro, that small cleave is very hard to find, right? So I think this is actually, like, a card that, like, people maybe are cutting from 6, and they shouldn't be, just because I think it helps handle decks like 13. It's very hard for 13 to attack into a 9k that doesn't take damage without losing a forward, right? Like, the first attack is like Hope, but Hope becomes a 9k on attack unless there's a Fang already on the field, right? So, like, you're reducing your damage potential, and, like, they can't profitably swing into them. They can't Bahamut the 24 off the field. Just ends up being a really obnoxious card for those aggro decks to deal with, and I think that that's a really cool niche for the card to play. I also don't really get why he's a 3 CP 9k. Like, every line of text on the card is good. Like, the downside takes 4 turns to matter. And, like, if he lives for 4 turns, you've won the game. Right? Like, moving along, the Turks are all really good. Rufus is really obnoxious, which he probably needs to be. Medius is solid, but I think kind of awkward to time. Especially because, like, a lot of decks right now that are playing heavy summon counts are using things that are trying to do summons infinitely, and Medius being unable to be cast multiple times has like a very bad conflict with that. And then even more so than that, if you're trying to just lock your opponent out of the game and stun them for a turn to win, Vincent does a better job of hitting the backups, and then freezing forwards is not really a primo effect for a 2CP summon. So I think Medius is going to be just awkward to find a home for, is kind of the impression I've gotten the more I've, like, seen her and played her. Lock is very good, although I do kind of agree that it does lock out the engine, no pun intended, of the deck. Moving along. Edge is really cool. This card's super, super cool. Is it super crazy good? Maybe not, but I think that there are going to be homes for this guy. I could see him as like a one of in any crystal deck, especially like water, so you could search it out with Sarah as an alternate target if you don't need the Princess Sarah anymore. Uh, just every line of text on him is good, and being as generic and splashable as he is, I think it's hard for him to not be good somewhere eventually, right? Uh, I think Botanist is a bit over-designed, but the more I've thought about it, like, there's a world where this sees some play. It does allow you to play a very low count of other color backups. Like, thinking of something like Icewind, the more I think about it. Like, Icewind doesn't want to play a lot of ice cards, so getting down your first ice backup a lot of the time requires you to pitch a card you don't want to, like a Lock or a Sid Haze. This is a way of cheating that restriction. It also allows you to get a lot of, like, very strange backups. If you ever get like a very expensive backup with good text, has like a lingering effect that maybe you just don't want to actually pay for, Botanist would actually, like, be fine. Like, in a lot of ways, Botanist becomes a blank backup, but that sort of gives you the ability to get any backup into play. And, like, something like a Tyro or a Shantoto giving you, like, rainbow access without paying 5 CP, like paying 3 instead. I don't know. There's interesting stuff with this. I don't think it'll find a home, but if they ever print like an 8 CP backup that, like, you just want on the field, this maybe we'll see some interesting play. Genova Dreamweaver is, I think, still a card that's a little bit slept on, especially in the monster decks. I know that like paying to animate a monster is not ideal, and that like we do have another Garnet situation, which Final Fantasy players do not play Garnets in decks ever. But all the text in this card is very good. Chilinka Yuri. I think the biggest problem is that Yuri is conflicting with one of the most accidentally broken cards of all time in the Opus 18 Yuri that like just can't ever be chosen. But all the text in this card is good, and honestly, like this Yuri with the old Chilinka legend, like does say break 2 characters on a party attack. If you can pull that off, it is really really solid. Fat Chocobo ended up being a lot more expensive than I thought it would be, and just hasn't really found a home. I thought this would be like a good one or two of in Iridia, and I think that like there's still maybe an argument for that, but just in general, the difference between like 8,000 or like eight counters on Iridia and 6 is a lot, and 8K cleave is not as good even if you're able to do it on your opponent's turn. I think number 128 is actually another card that's kind of slept on. 7K can't be reduced is very, very good. And you can do this with Edgar. Like I think Edgar number 128 is maybe something that should have seen a lot more experimentation than it has. No-No's a lot better than I thought he would be. Being able to give a forward pseudo brave is actually really good, as it turns out. Beldat, I think, is a card that will find a home eventually. I think the ability to copy essentially a forward. She draws a card on entry 2 CP forward that essentially draws a card, is always going to be good, but she has to be specifically in a deck that can cast any element of cards, which is tricky. We're talking about things that need access to, or consistent access to Cosmos or Tyro or Shantoto, and I don't know that we're there yet, but keep an eye on this one. She definitely has potential. Nash is really good, seen a lot of play. Especially since Althea's banning did one other thing that people haven't realized. It really opened up the design space for Crystal Chronicles backups, because it's not as easy as it was to just say, well, I'll just get Althea, and Althea is always good. You have a lot more options for like toolbox units with like Stiltskin and Fiona and Nash. And I think that's really, really cool. Nash is just another great option for that toolbox. And Indiscriminate Backup Break is really powerful. Goddess is better than I thought she was by a lot. So the thing about the Goddess that I didn't like is I was evaluating all the board wipes in the set on a metagame where 13 was the best deck in the game. And in a metagame where 13 is the best deck, by the time the Goddess kills your opponent's field, they've already won the game, and they've drawn 1,000,000 cards. But that's not where the Goddess actually shines. It's kind of like the value Shantotos that you sometimes go for. Like your opponent will have 2 forwards on the field, and you're like, really kind of just want those off the field, and like 7 CP to kill 2 things is just kind of worth it. The Goddess is kind of like that. Like if you just like see 2 or 3 forwards on your opponent's side of the field, like 7 CP to clean that up very cleanly is just good enough. And even if they are going to swing them all in, a lot of times because they're obligated to swing them, you kind of know everything that's attacking. And like 7 CP, take a damage or 2, break your opponent's field is the text on Titan, or not on Titan, on Shadow Lord. And that is a very good board wipe. Goddess kind of can do a very decent Shadow Lord impression against everything that's not 13. And the break zone hate is debilitating for a lot of decks. Think Scions, think stuff like Iridia, where they want all their summons in the break zone. So I think this card is a lot better than I. She's a lot better than she reads. I'll put it that way. She's been. It's gonna sound really stupid, but I've had a lot of fun playing Sky Pirates. And Sky Pirates used to have to do the like Levy Leviathan, Levy Bismarck thing to like win games. And the Goddess just like condenses that role into a single card. This Ritz, mark my words, is going to find a home eventually. She's just too good not to. A 1 CP forward that can do just a little bit of damage and then draw a card is really good. Similarly, this Yuffie I think is a lot better. Like for a common, she's actually pretty decent. Ignis is very, very good. I don't think people really put together just how big of a change. Like this is a complete paradigm shift for what both Earth decks and Retainers specifically are capable of doing. To the point where like Retainers won L3 against what's essentially full power 13. Um, in like one of the biggest L3 tourneys in Japan, and it was entirely based on the strength of Ignis and the Opus 18 Yuri being able to reduce damage and kill things. Especially because like Earth tends to play like large backup counts, especially like stuff like Mono Earth can be up on upwards of like 15 to 18 backups to enable Minor. Being able to like get value off of those backups is really really important and really impactful. Chaos hasn't seen any play this set. Keep an eye on it next set when Jack is printed. This card actually is going to be a lot more valuable. Pretty ironic actually. Leatherworker is very very good. Gigas is I think another card I slept on. I don't know that I love how many random like Earth monsters people play, but this is another Earth monster that gets your character count up. Kind of prevents you from dying for a little bit until you get to the critical mass to where you just win the game, which is really really good. If Falna is like a decent like one of Earth backup for just about any deck. It's not like an all star, but it's it's fine. Minor, I think the math on Minor doesn't work in your favor as often as people are playing Minor, but because Earth is so bad for backup engines, like I don't actually like the Claris Kolka engine all that much outside of if you can't play Epitaph, I think that deck is not like that engine is not very good, and Minor like gives you a reward for playing a large number of backups, which I think makes a big difference. But I do think that like playing even 18 backups, he whiffs a lot more than you would think. Which is, if this guy whiffs, he's atrocious. Compared to something like Ricard, where you just get to like reveal the top 5 cards of your deck and add a card to your hand. Minor does a lot worse of an impression. Cesil is busted. This card is so good. It does everything. Puts you on an arbitrary point of damage. Stabs off damage really well. It's very hard to attack into it. You can't really dedicate removal to Cecil because unless it's like non-targeting cleave, then you don't get to do it. And I think like the design space on this card is really good. Being able to play stuff like seeing that old Opus 2 Cecil see play all of a sudden just because you can cheat it into play in response to a trigger that it would be useful against is really cool. I think that it's just a really really neat card that does a lot. Tifa, I think, is still really underwhelming. I know like the one-shot stuff is still like possible, but like anything that sets that up, you're probably just better off playing other cards. Like anytime you have to like, because like the optimal way to play her now is to have an empty hand, but then you're telegraphing no interaction, and it's hard. You can't give her haste in element, and even if you did, she only gets 3 attacks on her first turn. She's only a 9k, so she loses to Warrior of Light. There's like a world where she's okay into like an Ice Lightning because they can't dull her, and most of their forwards aren't bigger than 9k. But they also can just break her, I'm pretty sure, with stuff like Sephiroth or with Phasalis. So I'm just not a fan of this card. This to me is like the Timmy card of the set where like it does one thing and that thing is like super flashy and super exciting, but it's not particularly strong. I'm kind of just, the more I've played Final Fantasy, the more I've come to the realization that you don't need to actively try to win the game. If you are ahead on game and controlling the game state, having a closer card doesn't actually do anything because you can just stay winning for longer with your top decks rather than try to like find a way to time this like weird finisher payload. Right? And that's what Tifa is. She's a weird finisher payload that doesn't have a way of doing that finisher like as she comes in unless you have exactly Barrett on field or Bart's. But even in those situations, those decks don't play a lot of backups, so you can't use the multi-attack without like ramping backups, which those decks don't want to do because they generally want to get to 2 backups and like call it there. And like even a double attacking 9K is not that good. We have plenty of cards that can do double attacking if that's all you're after that aren't this awkward to play. Fenrir is, I think, really frustrating. The place this thing is showing up the most is stuff like 13 or Neo X Death Turbo decks that like are just trying to turn off as much interaction as possible so that like their obnoxious, impossible to answer card doesn't die. And like there's some cool things about that. But also like it's really frustrating to target a lightning and lose because your opponent has a Fenrir. And like there's so little counterplay to it other than like assuming your opponent doesn't have it. I don't like gameplay like that. I just wish it had like some kind of cost, but then like if it had a cost, you'd like be competing with Mist Dragon. So like the cost is that like it's awkward to time, so like you just kind of end up with this like auto win card in the right situation where it's like if your opponent has the out to you trying to survive against an aggro deck, you just lose. But you can't play around it. Like it doesn't like you don't play differently against 13 because Fenrir is a possibility. You just lose to them randomly because they have Fenrir. Which, like, that sucks. Mira is really, really broken. I don't know why she doesn't dull the monster she chooses with this character cannot be broken text. You could do this with the Illusory Knight and Mannequins, actually, but it wasn't that good because Mannequins are not very good. But Mira also is like a 1 CP forward with an EX burst that draws you a card on entry if you're a little lucky. And also, like, just stalls. If you have 3 Miras, you get to cast her 3 times. You have 3 zombies, you get to cast her another 3 times. Like, you could just stall 6 to 9 turns with this card. Every single other Earth card that does something like this dulls the character it chooses. And if it did that, I think the card would be fair. But I think the card is actually just a design mistake because of this. She's the exact right cost and the exact right element to make this work. In other words, she's really good. I just don't like how uninteractive monsters that become forwards are. There's no EX burst that stops them. If EXs are meant to be a way of stopping like OTKs in the game, there's no. Especially like you just like have to like kill Mira on entry before it goes to your turn if you want to have any chance of doing damage. But like even there, you end up in a situation where like you look at a board of like 18 monsters and you have to like decide how do you actually like get through, like what are the attacks that get you through what they're doing, which like always exists, but like you can interact with other forwards and get them off the field so your smaller bodies can attack. If your opponent has a bunch of monsters, your small forwards just never get to do any damage no matter what you do, which I think is just like really frustrating and something that like feels like a design oversight. Like I like almost wish that like anything that said they killed a forward could kill a monster that can become a forward, right? But like that's a lot harder to design for. I think they just need to like have more modal cards that like break monsters as well. Because like the only good cards to do it are like exactly Fenrir, Alexander, and Locke. Everything else is just like very meh for monster removal. I guess Ramu, the old one, is like fine for it, but again, like, that has like a really weird cost restriction, so it's just like hard to get monsters off the field. Mira doesn't help that either. And like the other thing is that like because Mira chooses a monster that's like but like is still as it's still a monster, you can like choose a zombie. The zombie is still not a forward, so you can't break it on the stack very easily unless you have one of those like very rare points of monster interaction. And if you don't, that zombie basically then becomes a forward and then just like can't be broken unless you have like a Cullen or a Porum, which is like, yeah, it's this card's really frustrating in a way that like doesn't feel intentional. Leo's really good. Plays plays that old Yuri, the Yuri 18 from the deck, and then gives him 1,000 power. And the thing about that that's really good is that you go Northstall into Leo. Leo plays Yuri. Yuri then can attack every turn, activate himself, and a backup. And you have like a 1 CP, or like a free 4 that comes out with him that has Brave, 9k, cannot be chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities. And like that's really hard for a lot of decks to deal with. Especially aggro decks just can't get over that sometimes. Alize is a lot better than I thought she would be. This entire second text just doesn't exist a lot of the time in the decks I play her in. But it turns out, just Layla Viking, for better Vikings, is really, really good. And there's a lot of good Scion targets. She's the card that kind of like completely revitalized like Mono Lightning as a color. Like she's like the real Scion legend of the set. Estinian, I'm gonna be real. I don't think he's very good. The more I've played, so when I saw Estinian, I was like, well, he does the thing Lightning Legends always do, which is like big number, hit hard, try to win the game. Which I've already established, if you're trying to like cheese a win with a card like this, you're still trying to time an awkward card to try to win the game, and granted you have a lot of ways to get access to him, but you still have to like warp him, you still telegraph for when he comes in, and then he doesn't do anything other than that. So like if he comes in and your opponent just says, okay, I'm going to dull Estinian as you go to combat, you just kind of like wasted a card that could be doing something. So I don't know. I feel like there's some like thematic, like the warp being thematic is cool for the jump. I wish there was a way to like rewarp him, like at the end of combat, or like action ability pay 2, remove a city from the game, put a warp counter on him would be like really cool. I think, or put like 2 warp counters on him if they're worried about like warping him and like him doing a ton of damage very quickly. But it's not like that. Like it wouldn't be unique to Estinian to do a ton of damage really quickly. Or even like discard 2 cards, warp Estinian, put a counter on him would be really cool. I think. As it is, he's like a way of like finishing the game. But again, if you're already winning, you don't need to win the game like as fast. Like you can just like swing with a Grahatia or in an Ishtola, and the game is going to end anyway. So he's like only okay. Angela, by the way, is actually sneaky good. Just keep an eye on this card, depending on how many other soldiers get printed. Graha is really good. This is the other like really good Scion that got printed this set. Being able to play either Alize or Alfino out of the deck, or Ishtola, is really, really good. Not too much more to say about that. Weaver is busted. This is like the card that Lightning needed, and didn't even know it needed, honestly. Lightning has a lot of cards that like kind of dig for other cards and recur other cards, and like a lot of like decent, like Lightning has a pretty good density of backups that just don't search each other. But having a backup that like just comes down for free once you get a critical mass of backups down is just really good in a color that has that effect, right? You know, like backup into a card, into a third backup, into Weaver is, you know, just really, really strong. The Emperor, by the way, is, I think, maybe a little slept on. It's just a little bit too specific. I really, really want, I don't know if they'll ever print it, I want a Legend, Ice, 2CP backup, card named the Emperor. The card named the Emperor you have multiplayable. And I just want to see what that deck looks like. I think it'd be really, really cool. But until that happens, we're kind of stuck with, like, you know, the awkward situation of, like, how much are we going to do that? And like the fact that the next Emperor comes in dull means that, like, this isn't like a really good blocker or anything. I don't think there's a lot of Emperors with like great effects or like entry abilities. You could like use this to get a backup, but like only on death. Like again, it's like it's the nice thing is that this does give you or more Emperor names that you don't have to banish. Like drawing the multiple Dark Emperors doesn't just end you if you wanted to run the Opus 17 Dark Emperor, which is a better card than people give it credit for. Johnny's really good. Chadley is also really good. I think Behemoth is a little bit. We're going to see a lot more Behemoth, I think, in the future, just because 2 CP for 7k is a really good rate, and it leaves behind a character, which is going to be really important with the Zondi coming up. I think this card has a lot of potential, like sneaky potential. Um, Mira Legend. I think this card is still very slept on. Chris Matisky talked about in his post-event recap about like he thinks like this card is like really cute, but the other one is the actual legend. This one like does the thing that like monsters already don't have problems with, which is like you're killing your own monsters for your opponent. But I still kind of think that like transforming a monster into a body your opponent has to deal with, or they just lose the game, is still potentially pretty good. And she kind of just like copies the effects of that monster. Killing things like Trapdoor is really nuts. Like on command, you get to kill your Cleones to draw a card. Uh, there's really not a lot of value lost if you like swing a blue worm in, do the damage that the blue worm was going to do over the course of the game anyway, and sack it off for a Mira. Like the only time that matters is if that blue worm either needed to block to not die, or if you're running Hippocampos. And I think in either of those situations where you're not, I think Mira is a completely acceptable, very powerful card. I also don't think it's unreasonable to maybe expect to play both Miras. Like one copy of this one and then 3 copies of the EX one. And in the situations where this Mira is good, she just can revive herself for free. Like I think that's just valuable innately, right? So I don't agree that this card is bad. I think this is just underexplored because there's only so many players in FF right now. Fusoya is really good, by the way. I don't need to say too much about that. Ramu, this card is insane. The biggest thing I didn't realize is just how good dulling the forward is with Man in Black. You kind of just get to like, if your opponent has a 5k forward and then 2 other forwards, you get to dull one, say one can't block and kill the third with this, which is just insane. It's so hard to push damage into a Man in Black if this Ramu's in the break zone. And it's like giving any random forward haste for 2 CP is actually like above rate. Like if you just have 2 modes in this card that are like worth using, this card is insanely good. Ramza is really good. It's kind of like Porum, except if Porum had haste and didn't have an EX burst. It's like you have to like find the crystal, but as soon as you have that crystal, like, you don't have to keep the crystal, which is cool. So it doesn't have the Kain problem there. It has haste, unlike Kain, and he doesn't really have to put himself at risk. Like even as just a blocker, indiscriminate break on a 2 CP forward is wildly good. So your opponent will almost never block this if the haste matters. If the haste doesn't matter, he is the most obnoxious blocker in the history of time. Reeve is crazy. This card's really good. Reeve is like now a weirdly contested backup name. There's 3 Reeves, all of which have seen and will continue to see competitive play. I've seen a fair number of decks playing Owaka. I think they're all just kind of incorrect, to be honest. I don't like the condition to make Owaka live isn't a hard condition to meet, but it is a condition. It's like copy. Like there's so many cards that already do this. Like you have the Mera Wib, which granted, like maybe you want to run the other Mera Wib. Okay, fine. But then if you don't want to run that Mera Wib, then you have Waka. And then, like, if you don't care about the EX burst, Loporite is just better than this in every way, in my opinion. It's breakable, it's multiplayable, it's not awkward to time. Every list I've seen play Owaka, I think should be playing other backups in that slot. Cesil is solid, but I think the Paladin Cesil was the one that needed this the least. The Dark Knight being able to tag into any Paladin means this is like, it's good to have, especially in an open decklist format, because it means that your opponent can never choose a Category 4 forward without the threat of it being cancelled. But this honestly should have said summons or abilities, just because of that. And like it almost needs that to be like as competitive with the other options for Cesil as it could be. Alfino, I still think it's a little disappointing. Like he's fine, but like fine doesn't cut it when the other Alfino says search anything, and then one of the other ones says draw 2, discard 1 to filter a little bit, and also on damage 5 win the game. Like this just kind of like falls by the wayside compared to those a lot, even if the like Alize Alfino combo here is kind of cute. Hippocampos is a lot better than I thought it would be, just because monsters don't have a clear answer. And I don't think even Neo X Death Next that changes that. We really need like a modal summon. It's like 3 CP, draw a card, or like 3 CP, choose one, draw a card, break all monsters your opponent controls. Um, or break all monsters on the field. Make it reciprocal. There's just no downside to playing monsters like this at all. And just like stacking 8 million characters on the field, and your opponent just never gets to play the game again. Moving along, Porum is just a really bad name. I didn't realize it's when she dies you get to do it as well. So like she was actually a lot better than I thought she was in that regard. The Fiend. This card is both better and worse than I thought he was. I lost to this at Nats. This card basically one-carded my Rydia deck. Once my opponent Ryan Chen went to 5 damage against me, and then revived the Fiend with Elena, and I just lost. I could not get him off the field. I couldn't do anything to get him. 9K doesn't take damage less than his power, and Brave just kind of wins games by itself sometimes. And turning off your opponent's interaction is very, very good. I don't think there's too much more to say. I think it's maybe the best forward Water has generically, as far as just like, I want to put a guy on the field that my opponent is going to deal with, or they're going to lose the game. I know Tidus has that slot for a lot of people, but I think that like Tidus is a card that like Tidus doesn't stop your opponent from doing anything. He just does damage slowly, and if your opponent is bold enough to choose him, they lose the game. But they just don't ever have to choose him. They like will just let you. Tidus wins the game over the course of 7 turns and does nothing else. And then if Tidus dies without being chosen or dies off of an EX burst, it's the worst feeling in the game. The Fiend, at least, I think, has the same effect as Sarah Mobius or a lot of cards like that, where there's a lot of hidden power in the card because you don't know when he's locking your opponent out from doing something that would win them the game. You don't know when your opponent has a 6 EP Leviathan they want to cast, but they can't because the Fiend is on the field. I think that there's a lot of value in that that's very hard to tell unless you like check with your opponent after every single game you play. So I think that that's something to consider with this card. And I would say that if you're in a playtest group and you're playing with the Fiend and you want to see how good it is in any particular format, you need to be like evaluating the Fiend after every game it comes into play and ask your opponent, okay, how good was the Fiend actually that game? Was it actually correct to play it? Mist is a card that I thought the minus on the warp, like just paying 2 CP for essentially nothing for this long, would just not be that good. But I thought like, well, maybe like you curate your draw, but the timing of this is not very good either because the card that you look at, if you want to leave it on there, it's going to go to damage if you take damage that turn. And like you don't draw it unless you like find a way to draw a card. So like the warp and like scry is like just the wrong timing for what you'd want to do. So I think like the only real value is if you have like a lot of warp synergies or like RFG synergies with like the Urianger or something. I'm not really a fan of this card. Speaking of Urianger, it's a lot more awkward to make this live early, but I don't think it's hard enough to do where this card's not worth considering in any deck that can play it. I just don't think there's a lot of reasons to be playing 14 in water right now. Searching Leviathan is nice. Searching Lakshmi is not bad. Searching like Alfino's 17 is not bad, but like I don't know that it's enough to justify the awkwardness of playing Urianger without a lot of targets. I almost wish it said like category 14 character, but like that might have been too much because then you could search the standard unit backups. Yuna, I will not say I was wrong on Yuna because I don't think I am. I know that this one Australian Nats with maybe one of the coolest deck lists, period. Like really, really creative deck building, super, super cool concept. If Yuna sticks around, Yuna is insanely good. I don't think I even said that when I did my long rant on this card that like was like 10 minutes in the set review. The biggest thing is that if Yuna doesn't stick around, there are better options. So you have to like specifically have things you want to do with this card And she still dies to so much. She still dies to Heka. She dies to Shantoto. She dies to Luso. She dies to so many things so easily that you have to have a deck that is dedicated to making sure Yuna doesn't die. And honestly, casting Titan and targeting her so she can't be broken is like the thing I didn't realize you could do with this card. Is like Titan, target Yuna, Yuna doesn't take damage. I'm not discarding the summon anyway. So, I still don't think she's very good, but I think in the deck she's good in, she is very, very good. But she's so specific in such a weird build around that I almost wonder if there's like just a better way to do what the decks that are using her are doing. Like if you just ran Lakshmi instead and said like, hey, I don't have a auto ability for you to cancel with Amaterasu and like remove my entire engine. If that would just be better. Granted, like Holy's really crazy, but that's kind of like the where I'm at with Yuna. I have seen the Lait. There are decks she is good in. I do not think that most decks should be considering her, and I think that it's a very specific situation that made her good in the deck that she was in the Australian Nationals winning list. Unicorn is wildly good. The only nombo with this card has is that all of the like category 6 cards that like reveal and add do not add category 6 summons. So, and like Lock does not add this. So it's a whiff for Lock, even if it does proc Lock. If you cast as Lock, will get the reveal. So that's a little bit awkward and annoying. But, I mean, everything on this card is good. Like, even just the modal, like, activate it forward and draw a card is really, really wild. So, really, really good card. A really good staple. It'll see play for a long time to come, I think. Luna Freya is actually better for a common than a lot of people would give it credit for. So, good for her. Loporrit is maybe the best backup in the game, and it's funny because they're printing a version of Loporrit for Wind's next set that is worse Loporrit, and it's still maybe worth considering because Loporrit is that good. I think this is maybe the best backup in the entire game right now. It does everything. It's 1 CP to play it. Fixes your hand. Allows you to play a large number of Garnets in your deck without having any issues. You can break it, so drawing multiples of it or drawing more backups late game is not a problem. You can still get value out of your backups. You can cash it in late game if you just need to dig for an answer to whatever your opponent's doing. All of that's really, really good. It's multi-playable. It's category 14 standard unit for Grahatia. This card is nuts. Everything this card does is wildly good. I think it's on par with Sarah, Norstalin, Cooch Haspel. Like, it's that tier of backup. Rosa is good but specific. Rosa is just a really hotly contested name still. But having the Cesil combo cost literally nothing and also not needing to have backup fixing for it is still very, very strong. And then, like, once you do the thing, she is just, like, a really nice sacrifice outlet if you get, like, a Tomost or something. She's neat. For the Light and Dark, Spiritus is a lot better than I thought he would be. It kind of turns out that, like, a lot of decks that use crystals, when they use one crystal, they can just, like, accidentally pay another crystal a lot of the time, at which point you get, like, a refund of a crystal. It matters for stuff like Sarah Mobius, like Scry 1 again, things like that. And, like, 5k power is a lot, and kind of makes it very difficult to actually block any deck that's playing Spiritus, or, like, remove a forward that, like, has this, Spiritus behind it. Likewise, Materia is less good than I thought, but not horrible. I think the biggest thing is just, like, it's hard to play Light and Dark backups that you can't search. So, I think these still have homes, but you really are going to want a specific thing to do with these when you're using them. I do really like how Materia kind of lets you, like, stash away CP for future turns in a way. Like, you can spend, like, 3 CP if you get, like, way ahead. For the Legends, Xenos I think is really good in Ice Earth and really good in Mono Wind. A little more specific than I thought he would be, but just generally a good card and a good card to have access to. He's cheap. Get a place out of him. We never know when we're having another Chaos situation. And the card has enough good synergies and good things it does that I wouldn't be surprised to see there be a deck that like specifically wants Xenos over every other card you can possibly play. Maybe like there's like a really good sacrifice outlet where you can kill your own forwards like for a benefit. So like casting Xenos to like give Xenos haste, swing in. If your opponent doesn't block, they take the damage, and then you sacrifice the Xenos back to the break zone to cast them again next turn. I wouldn't be surprised if that just is a thing. And then lastly, the card that I did not expect, Shinryu is meta-warpingly good. So again, when I was evaluating the set, when I was first reading it, I was thinking in the context of 13. And in the context of 13, Shinryu is not very good. So you can get that out of the way with. Shinryu does not win the games against 13. Timing him is awkward. You're going to eat 4 damage before the Shinryu comes into play. And 9k, I know I've said like it's a good number, but it's not good enough to where you're going to trade 5 CP for a 9k with 6 CP for a board wipe. What Shinryu does do, though, is anytime you fall behind, your opponent kind of like is in this awkward situation where every deck, when it's winning, goes to 3 forwards. That's just a thing that happens in Final Fantasy. So if you're either behind or you play a deck with a lot of forwards that aren't actually forwards, like monsters, Shinryu is consistently a 2 CP, search a board wipe or the best card in your deck if you don't need the board wipe or anything like that. Even 5 CP to search out Cosmos is really not that bad if your deck is very, very, very Cosmos reliant. Kind of when I came back from US Nationals, Shinryu became like the most fun card to play with. I've thrown him in almost everything I've played since, except for like maybe Mono Wind, but like even Mono Wind likes him, to be honest. He's like a complete revitalization of the Warrior of Light Refia deck that I like dabbled with last set. I've won locals on that like multiple times now, thanks to Shinryu. Shinryu was an all-star in those games. I think he makes Sky Pirates into a deck that you can consider now. Because again, kind of like how the Goddess condensed 2 things that like you used to get with like all the card draw in Sky Pirates, Shinryu condenses all of those roles and more. Shinryu is extra copies of Vaughn. He's extra copies of Philo, if you want to use a special to go for game. He is a board wipe if your opponent tries to rush you down, realizing that you're on a control deck that they'll never outscale. He is a way to win the game once you're drawing 4 cards every turn. And like, it's very hard for this card to ever be bad. Like, you have to die before you have the ability to cast him for Shinryu to not be a useful card to hold on to in your hand. Or he has to like brick you, which like is the only awkward thing, because you do have to play 3 of him probably, because if you play just 2, if one goes to damage, then you don't get the ability to do the board wipe unless you have a secondary board wipe like a 5 CP heck in your deck, right? But even there, like, I've always played 3 just because like you kind of just, when you want to draw him, you really want to draw him, and then when you do draw him, you just win the game in the right situation. Super, super, super cool card. Anything that slows the format down, I personally really enjoy, just because I like slower back and forth games where both players are doing a lot of thinking and a lot of evaluating. Like 3 and 4 turn games that like you'll sometimes like. To me, the least fun games are where it's like your opponent goes like Hope Vanille, and the next turn Lightning, 4 damage. You don't draw an answer, and then they swing again and you lose in 3 turns. It's like, cool, GG's. Thanks for showing up. I'm glad that we got paired this round. Anything that like makes that gameplay less viable and less common, I personally really enjoy and think is really healthy for the game, and Shinryu does that. So that's all I got. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Just an hour of me ranting about some cardboard. Coming up soon, I'll do the EU and Australian Nationals review along with the deck Sage, and then obviously a full set review when we get it. I'm assuming probably like 2 weeks from now. Thanks for watching, everybody.